I'm Euro.
I'm Chris.
And this is Fork Bomb. Wednesday, February 7th, 2018, episode 19, Alternative DOS Versions.
Euro.
Yeah.
We're back.
We're back. Oh man, I can't believe it. So much has happened between the last episode and this episode that, I'm just glad we're getting this episode made, and we will get this episode out, and hopefully nobody's forgotten about us.
Hopefully. Wouldn't blame him if we did, but if you haven't, thanks for remembering. You moved into a new house, right?
I did. I moved into a new house, and I don't remember if I had said that I had a new position in my job. I think I did. New house, and new Snowflake device that I'm not using, but that's new. And I'm on a tablet right now recording in Linux on a Microsoft Surface. Unheard of. I'm surprised this thing is working.
Good stuff.
So how about you, Chris? I know you had a lot of changes too.
I left the state. I moved to New York, left Florida, got new digs, new job, new life. So everything settled down. Eric is undergoing his own fair share of stuff. I'm sure he can talk about that when he comes back. Don't know when that will be, but he will be pestered every episode we do relentlessly until he does. But until then, Eric, we miss you. And we hope you can come back soon.
Yep, miss you, buddy. So we've had some time to ponder and think about what to talk about next, and we had a giant list. And from all these different things, we thought we'd talk about the different DOS versions that there were back then when DOS was a prevalent operating system. This seemed like a pretty neat topic, and actually most of the time I just used MS-DOS. So I didn't really know a whole lot about the other DOS versions, and I definitely didn't have any exposure whatsoever back then on any other DOS version except MS-DOS. So this is where I wish that we had Eric, because I know he would say something like, "Oh yeah, well I've used the Star Trek DOS before. Didn't you know about the Star Trek DOS?"
There actually was a Star Trek DOS.
I know. That's why I said it. Yeah. So, so we'll have to get his feedback on the next episode. But yeah. How about you, Chris?
Well, I too only used MS-DOS, and there are a surprising number of alternative DOS versions, whether they be old from back then or ones that are still currently maintained. But we focused on the three of the biggest ones, just to help keep the length of this episode down. And those versions are IBM PC-DOS, Digital Research DOS, or DR-DOS, or as some people like to say, Dr. DOS, and FreeDOS. So we're going to explain those in some depth and talk about our experiences playing with them and what we learned.
Now we know there were a bunch of different versions of DOS involved. I just wanted to point out that I know that we're probably going to get trolled and whatnot, that there were other versions that were superior or not superior to these. We know, but these were the ones that we picked. So enjoy.
So how about for each one we briefly, it could be brief or long as we want. This is our podcast, so, whatever. How about we talk about the history and then the experience playing with it?
Great. So I just want to mention that the DOS version that I was experimenting with is actually still in development, and it's not that old compared to the other two. But I had never used it before, and I figured it would be a great operating system to add to this list. So just wanted to point that out, that mine is still currently in development, and there is a lot of great projects that are revolving around the FreeDOS and the DOS core movement. So, yeah, just wanted to point that out.
Do you want to start with FreeDOS?
Sure. Let's start with the newest one then. So I was using FreeDOS while Chris was over there exploring the archives of DOS versions and different DOSes that were out back then. But I figured I would use FreeDOS and tell you guys a little bit about it. So a little bit about FreeDOS, and it's a very, very brief history, or at least what I found was very brief. So it's an open source alternative to MS-DOS. It was started in 1994 by Jim Hall, Pat Villani. Please excuse me, Platt, if you are listening to this and I said your last name. And Tim Norman, which came up with what consists of the kernel, the command line interpreter, and the core utilities. So those three guys pretty much started the entire FreeDOS, the movement, the operating system, and whatnot. And there was a lot of different releases before the actual release came out, which was in 2006 when 1.0 came out. When the latest version is actually as of today is 1.2. So they have a lot of interim releases and whatnot, release candidates and different versions like that. So that's why we don't have a 2.0 and a 3.0 and 4.0 and things like that. The minimum requirements, of course, for DOS are pretty basic, pretty standard. I mean, you need a PC or an XT with 640 kilobytes of memory. So we're pretty good there. At least my tablet can run it. The OS has several improvements due to newer technology that didn't exist at the time of MS-DOS. So some notable features are advanced power management, large hard drive support, HX-DOS extender, which allows you to run Windows 32 console applications like, how do you say this, Chris? I mean, I don't know. I'm totally going to botch this, but I usually call it QEMU.
QEMU.
But some people call it QEMU. Okay, I didn't know if this was some kind of leet thing, where you had to say it right. But anyway, so between that and Bosch. So unfortunately, only Windows versions 1 and 2 can run properly in FreeDOS. The later versions cannot run due to 386 enhanced mode. Although there are some experimental kernels that can partially run it, it's not officially put onto the operating system. So, but FreeDOS can be installed side by side with Windows 95, 98, ME by using a boot manager, but Windows cannot be installed on top of those. So you know how you would, or at least that's the way I did it. I installed MS-DOS first on my DOS rig, and then I installed Windows 98 on top of it. So I was able to pretty much get everything, all the features from DOS. And I know that Windows 98 had DOS, I believe it's version 7.0. But I had a lot of stuff installed in my own configs for DOS 6.22. So I was able to just install Windows 98 on top of that, and my all my settings and everything, all my programs, they're still there from DOS 6.2. So you can't really do that with FreeDOS. They're not compatible. So you have to install them side by side. For Windows 2000 XP, FreeDOS kernel can be booted by adding it to the Windows 2000 or XP bootloader configuration file, the boot.ini file, or the freeldr.ini for the equivalent for React OS. There is currently no planned support for NTFS, ext2, or exFAT, but there are several external third-party drivers available for that purpose in case you actually wanted to look at the drives that supported those file systems.
May I point something out before we move to the next section?
Yeah.
The latest version, 1.2, was released December 25th, 2016. So that was a lovely Christmas present a year and a half or so ago.
So awesome. Those guys planned it right.
Yep, and that's how active this version of DOS still is.
And this I'll get to this at the end of my section. But there's some neat things going on with FreeDOS. So one of the really cool things about FreeDOS, Chris, is that the installer was so easy to use. It was like installing any other software that I had installed before. and I'm talking about like recent software. It was that easy. The installer is pretty much made, Fisher Price. It's so easy to use. It actually prompts you, are you sure you want to do this, and things like that. I even took screenshots because I thought it was so simple. It didn't really have that many options. So, and it actually had a lot of information as far as just what it's going to do and things like that. So, I mean, it provides plenty of warnings before proceeding to wipe your disk. It reminds you that if you have a previous OS installed, like Windows, that it may override. It offers full installation or choose your own packages. So you can do a custom install in case you want to install everything. I installed everything. I don't believe it took that much space at all, and whatever space it took, it was in megabytes. So it definitely wasn't anything that I was upset about, or that it was taking too much space. I mean, it's DOS. Come on. Another thing that I liked about it is that when you start it up, immediately FreeDOS gives you some options, and these are options that I actually wish that would have come native from MS-DOS. I mean, as out of the package stuff. And who's been really, really helpful with this is I go on, there's a channel on YouTube called Phil's Computer Lab, and he talks about, all kinds of computing items and computing things, but including setting up old DOS rigs and benchmarking them and etc. So he has a whole tutorial about how to set up menus, so that way you can pick between what kind of memory management program you want. If you don't want any EMS, and things like that. It's really neat. And the thing about FreeDOS is that it already comes with these options as soon as you install it. So out of the box, it already asks you if you want to use extended memory or not, etc. So which actually, that brings me to one gripe about FreeDOS that I had, which is that the first option, JEMMX, it's JEMMEX, it didn't actually allow me to start when I launched it with my virtual machine. I was using VirtualBox, and it didn't allow me to start it, so I actually had to go online and figure out how come it didn't start. And so the thing about it is I had to actually boot it with the second option, which is using EMS. Now, this is a big issue for me because there's a lot of programs out there that require you to not use expanded memory. So you have to use the first option. And so good thing that it was a quick fix. Actually, so I mean, I have games that they won't even run if you have EMS on. So luckily, Retro Code Radio on YouTube found the answer, which is editing the fdconfig.sys file and replacing test under the jemmex.exe no EMS line to the memory having the issue. So I just I took the memory. When you launch it with the first option, it'll actually say on there it'll have the memory registrar with the issue. So if you put that on the fdconfig.sys line, the exact memory line, it will go ahead and boot. So I just did that. I saved the file, I restarted the machine, and then boom, all of a sudden I could use option number 1, which is really great. So, thanks a lot, Retro Code Radio, for that. Other things that I really liked about FreeDOS is the information that it provided when starting up. Drivers loaded, how much memory is consumed. I mean, this stuff is awesome. I just loaded up, and all of a sudden it came up with all the TSRs loaded, all the drivers loaded, and everything, and and how much memory each one is consuming. I mean, that's really great stats. I'm really, really glad that they had thought of this. Another really neat thing was the help system. It actually says type help to get help. So I did. I don't know what I'm doing, right? So I just type help, and all of a sudden this really neat help menu came up where you can search. The first page has the table of contents, and you can just navigate it with your keyboard. And if you have any, if you want to look for any command or anything like that, or how to use it, the correct syntax and everything, it's all right there. Really neat and pretty colorful. So you just type in help, and another thing that you could do is very similar to Linux, except Linux, I believe, uses man, right? Manual. I guess so. Yeah, so Linux uses man. This in here, you just type help and the command, and then the help menu will come up and search for that command automatically for you.
That is cool.
So I just type help print, and then the entire help menu program comes up and it goes to that section.
I never knew that.
Pretty neat.
I just sent you a link to the FreeDOS software page, and it gives you a list of what it includes in the installer. So you mentioned you selected the full install option, and I figured you might like to see what is included with that.
You know what? I actually had seen this before. I was looking through a few of them because I wanted to see what kind of DVD drive. I'm sorry, CD-ROM drivers that it included. So I was looking through the base packages and things like that to figure out what it had included. Phil from Phil's Computer Lab has some issues with some games, and in respect to the sound. So he had some issues with that. So he had mentioned that the driver that FreeDOS comes with isn't the most updated driver for this CD-ROM. It's not the most updated CD-ROM driver, I'm sorry. So you have to update it to the latest version, and then that seems to clear up a lot of the issues with the music and everything from games. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really great to have all the list of utilities and games and things like that it comes with.
Well, just to give a brief rundown, I mean, in that full installation, you have Super NES emulators, you have Commodore emulators, Game Boy emulators, you have the lame MP3 encoder, you have various text editors, some that exist on Linux like Emacs, and I think even Vim is on there. So there's a lot of cool stuff already built into FreeDOS. It's quite a lot to explore and very impressive for any form of DOS to have all these nifty tools. Hell, it even comes with the OpenGem desktop.
I was actually trying to find, though, and maybe I'm just not looking in the right place. And actually, you know what? I think I didn't. I was trying to look for QBasic, and what I found was actually Bytewater Basic Interpreter. So, yeah, I thought that was neat. There's also a C++, a C++ to C Common Converter. Huh. And then there's also a C compiler, Bruce's C compiler.
So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. So another thing that I really liked about it is that auto-completion works. So I actually got auto-completion work by including the files from 4DOS. So 4DOS is kind of like an extension to DOS that provides things like auto-completion and history and things like that to your commands. I don't know if it includes a long file name, if 4DOS includes that, but anyway, I do know that 4DOS is included with FreeDOS because I did see it under the bin directory. So, and yeah, auto-completion works, history, things like that. So I thought that was neat. These are things that I wish MS-DOS had come with, but, at the time, it didn't. So, another thing that I tried was editing. So I edited the autoexec bat file and the config. They have another kind of config file that other one that I had just mentioned previously, the fdconfig.sys file. So anyway, I edited those using the editor. Editor is really easy to use. It's pretty much like MS-DOS editor, except that it does have some interesting options under utilities. You get calendar and ASCII table for special characters. So I just thought that was kind of neat. I don't remember seeing that in MS-DOS config. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody out there. So the editor has a version of the common Windows model. So you click on the toolbar of the window and you can restore, close, things like that. So when you have the X in the top on one of the windows, you can click close and minimize and maximize. So that was another neat thing that I thought was interesting. So another neat thing about FreeDOS is it supports zipping zip files. It comes from the OS itself. Didn't have to install anything else. It has the integrated gzip executable, and as far as I know, it didn't come included with MS-DOS.
It most certainly did not.
Yeah. So That was neat. And I actually ran into another interesting program. It looks like a multi-user program called password.exe. So I actually went in there and you could set your own password for your login. I wasn't quite sure how to make it work, and I didn't really have enough time to play around with it, but it's a program that I want to use more, because I wonder if FreeDOS is multi-user.
Not really.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, why would password.exe exist? Just to create passwords?
I guess I'm not sure how it works.
Yeah, maybe it's just a multi-user for that program.
But
so
I know
that way you can save your password files as a user. So if somebody else used the computer, they could also generate their own passwords and under that one username.
But I know it's not a multi-user operating system, because that would also require fundamental changes to the file system. Because
permissions.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. So there is another thing that I'd like to point out is that it's easy to add new comments to help by using bookshelf add. So all you have to do is you type in bookshelf. It's just a command. It's actually an executable, and so and then you just type add, and then you can add your own. It's like adding stuff to Wikipedia, but it's for your help file in FreeDOS. Thought that was neat too. There are there's some share utilities, which allows you to file share and locking capabilities. I did not test this, though, but I did see it listed, and I saw it on the documentation as well. So these are things that definitely did not come with MS-DOS. And you know what? I wanted to mention that another really neat and interesting project that I found surrounding FreeDOS is this thing called Aura, which in its current release is in Milestone 4 or M4. It's part of the DOS Core project to have an OS run under DOS. So under FreeDOS is what they use as their base. And Aura is actually a GUI that sits on top. Very similar to how Windows 95 and 98 were more of operating system environments than they were operating systems. That's the way that Aura works. And Aura also extends FreeDOS, and it gives it TCP/IP capabilities, and you can install different apps and everything, different applications, and surf the web and everything. It even has a dock. It's very similar. It actually looks a lot like OS X with the dock in the bottom and everything. But yeah, it runs on FreeDOS, and I thought that was really neat. Or you know what? It could also look like one of the Linux UI shells, like a GNOME, but with the dock or Docky or the DocX, whatever it's called for the dock. Well, other than that, installing games and drivers is pretty much the same as it would be with MS-DOS, except, of course, for that thing that I had mentioned about CD digital audio not working. So Phil from Phil's Computer Lab, he pointed out that it's due to an older CD driver, which can be fixed by updating to a more recent driver by the same developer. And so, and another driver that doesn't work is the Soft MPU, also mentioned by Phil from Phil's Computer Lab, and I'll post a link on the show notes as well. There were some games, rare, but there were some games that refused to work, like Privateer, Need for Speed, and Fade to Black. But most games, they worked fine. That's pretty much all I have for FreeDOS. Do you have anything else to add to that?
That was an impressively well done overview. I do have one thing to add. A lot of the FreeDOS utilities you can use on other versions of DOS, like MS-DOS or the other versions of DOS we're going to be talking about. So when you go through that list of software that is on the FreeDOS page, you can apply it to other DOS versions. So it's not just limited to FreeDOS, because for the most part, DOS is DOS.
DOS is DOS. And DOS is good.
DOS is good. Yeah.
DOS is good. All right. Well, how about you, Chris? I know you were exploring Dr. DOS and PC DOS.
I'll start with PC DOS, since that one's pretty short. So there isn't much to PC DOS. PC DOS was sold by IBM from the early 80s all the way into the 2000s. Before version 6.1, it was an IBM branded version of MS-DOS, but afterwards it became its own independent product. So post 6.1 is mainly where we're going to focus. So why did PC-DOS even exist? Well, initially IBM wanted Microsoft to retain ownership of whatever software it developed, and it wanted nothing to do with helping Microsoft other than making suggestions or having input from afar. So they had an ownership. The previous ownership arrangement they had changed in PC-DOS 3.3 when the upgrade from DOS 3.2 to 3.3 was completely written by IBM with no effort on the part of Microsoft. PC-DOS 4.0 was the first version to include DOS Shell, which I think any DOS user has used DOS Shell at some point in time. And it's a full-screen utility designed to make a command line OS more user-friendly. It has, panes for copying and pasting files, and is generally easier than typing dir and copy and those various commands. 4.0 was also notable because Microsoft took back control of development for PC-DOS. MS-DOS, they just rebranded it to be PC-DOS for IBM PCs, when they released a bug-fixed DOS 4.01. When PC-DOS 5.0 came out, it was the last version of DOS that IBM and Microsoft shared the full code for. And PC-DOS 6.1, as previously stated, was the last IBM rebranded version of MS-DOS. After that, IBM and Microsoft parted ways in 1993. So this is where things get a bit more interesting, where PC-DOS becomes its own thing. So in 6.1, QBasic was dropped, and the MS-DOS editor was replaced with IBM eEditor. PC-DOS version 6.3 was also used in OS2 for the PowerPC and featured the Superstore disk compression technology from AdStore. PC-DOS 7 was the last release before IBM's Boca Raton facility closed, which I guess that's where PC-DOS was developed. That had all kinds of neat stuff. It has support for the Rex programming language. They had their own floppy file system, or that they used a different floppy file system called the XDF floppy disk format, which extended the 1.44 megabyte disk to support 1.86 megabytes.
Whoa, yeah, watch out.
Yeah, a lot of storage there. They changed the provider for their disk compression technology. They included an algebraic command line calculator. They included a utility program to load device drivers from the command line, which I guess would be pretty handy. And they also included many optimizations to increase performance and reduce memory usage. Then there was PC-DOS 2000, was released in 1998, had a niche market in had a niche in the embedded software market, was really just a slipstream of 7.0 with year 2000 and other fixes applied. Another obscure place it was used was Hitachi used it in their legacy drive fitness test utility and Hitachi feature tool until 2009, and ThinkPad products had a copy of it, had a copy of the latest PC-DOS in their rescue and recovery partition. Then there was 7.1, which included logical block addressing, LBA, and FAT32 partition support. There were various builds from 1999 up to 2003 that were not released in retail at all, but were used in various IBM products, such as the IBM Server Guide scripting toolkit. A build appeared in Norton Ghost from Symantec, and most builds of 7.1 were not actual releases. They were just limited to kernel files like IBMIO.com, IBMDOS.com, and Command.com. Versions since 1986 had support for client access to file services on IBM System 36, IBM System 38, and IBM mainframe computers, running Control Information Control System, or CICS. So if you needed a version of DOS to talk to your aged IBM mainframes, PC-DOS is it.
I think I have used PC-DOS before then, because I certainly ran Norton Ghost, and it would take you to some. I mean, it did run when you ran it off the live CD. I guess that is PC DOS running in the background.
Yeah, the older versions were.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That was a bit more in depth than I expected, but so may I talk about the installer?
Yeah, by all means.
As you mentioned with FreeDOS previously, it had various options and a whole bunch of pre-installed stuff. Well, PC-DOS is much smaller. It's mostly like the regular MS-DOS installer. The screens look very similar, but it has some optional settings that you can choose from, and those are mainly just the extra programs that it includes with it. You can't really configure the programs, you can just toggle them to yes and no. So the version that I tried, that I tested, was PC-DOS version 6.3, and the reason I chose that one was because I was doing this in VirtualBox, so unfortunately, since I don't have my retro rig going yet, because I still have to bring it from Florida, I wasn't able to use the what was that floppy format? I was not able to use the XDF floppy image format. VirtualBox does not like it.
Oh.
So 6.3 is different enough from MS-DOS to make it interesting, but
so you weren't able to run PC-DOS 2000, 7.1, things like that.
Right, but it's also when 6.3 is when it was an actual competitor to MS-DOS, so I figured that was probably the best version to try. Because the other ones, it was like, okay, well, clearly it's not going to, beat MS-DOS out, so we're just going to use it for our own things here at IBM.
Mm-hmm.
So in version 6.3, it's mostly like the regular MS-DOS installer, but it gives you the options to include Phoenix PCM CIA support, IBM Antivirus DOS, IBM DOS Shell, Central Point Backup, and Superstore /DS compression.
Holy cow, Central Point Backup. Huh.
Yeah.
I used to use that. Sorry to interrupt. It's just I used to use Central Point Backup when I, back in the 90s, I used to have a Colorado backup tape drive, and mine was a 128 megabyte tape drive. And so I would put in the tape drive, onto my computer, and it would I would launch CP Backup or Central Point Backup, and it would back up my entire drive onto these tapes. And I still remember the sound those tape drives would make when I would back up. It was so yeah, thanks Central Point Backup.
Well, IBM PC-DOS included it.
Great.
And then after that, it gives you the normal DOS yellow bar. So I think it came on. Let me see how many many discs this came with. Let's see, Retro Alt DOS. There it is. 5 floppy disk. It came on 5 floppy disk, and it would say, insert floppy disk 2 and floppy disk 3 until you were to the end of the install.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's definitely more than MS-DOS that I remember. I think MS-DOS only came with 2.
3. 6.22 had 3 floppy disks.
3, okay.
So when you install DOS Shell, it's pre-set up to run DOS Shell on login, and it already has mouse drivers going, and I'm not sure if it had a CD-ROM driver already preset up, but it definitely had more done for you than MS-DOS normally would have, because MS-DOS doesn't have a mouse driver pre-installed, doesn't have a CD-ROM driver pre-installed. You have to do all of it yourself, if I remember correctly. So they did make some effort to make it more user-friendly. In DOS Shell, it has a pane in the lower left-hand corner called main, where it has some shortcuts to the programs they want to showcase. For example, it has the IBM DOS e-editor, Central Point. They had Central Point Scheduler, which is kind of like cron in Linux and Unix, where when running, it's a memory resident program. When it's running, you can schedule commands to be ran at repeatedly at specific times a day, or once a week, or once a month. It also comes with an undelete utility from Central Point, and
nice.
a RAM boost utility. I don't know what Blackmagic it does, but I'm sure it does something.
Ugh, if it's anything like the stacker that I used to have, it's better not to use it. I used to have a card, actually, it's a hardware piece. It was a card, looked huge. It was probably as big as one of the new video cards are now. And it occupied my entire case. It was made by Texas Instruments, and I believe it was called the stacker. I don't remember. But anyway, it would actually load these TSRs into that card's memory so you would have free memory in your DOS program. But anyway, I don't want to remember that thing because it caused more problems than it solved. So, yep, please continue.
So one thing that also loads on startup if you install IBM antivirus is the first thing you see is IBM antivirus, and it comes up and says this version needs to be updated to enhance your protection, and please install the latest version of IBM antivirus. And it proceeds to scan your machine for viruses, and then it loads you into DOS shell. So I played with the various add-on utilities that it comes with, and I played with the e-editor, and I like it. I think I like e-editor better than I like the regular MS-DOS edit utility, and it lets you draw with the arrow keys, which was kind of neat. So, all in all,
that is neat.
I like PC-DOS, and I think I'm going to try it as a gaming rig.
So I wonder with this antivirus, I mean, it's obviously going to be outdated now, but how did it know that it needed to be updated? You know, I'm just wondering what kind of magic it did to know that it needed to be updated. Maybe it looked at the clock and it assumed that, well, if you haven't upgraded in 16 years, it's probably about time you do.
Probably. That's a good question.
Okay.
Yeah. I do have one question about FreeDOS that I should have asked a while ago.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You're mentioning that FreeDOS is still actively maintained. So why would someone use FreeDOS?
Well, I mean, besides the obvious legal implications of using MS-DOS, you know, you're not technically supposed to put it on there, although I don't think Microsoft would get pretty upset. I don't think they'd be upset if you installed 62 on your DOS rig, but anyway, so that is that. There is that. Also, if you're a proponent of open software, then you'd want to use FreeDOS. There's a lot of programs that run just as well on FreeDOS than it would on MS-DOS. So, you know, it's just think of it as a better version of MS-DOS or a newer version of MS-DOS that does most things that MS-DOS does. I don't want to say all of them because we did have some of those issues with those games, but for the most part, yeah, they ran pretty well. So if you want a DOS operating system that is up to par with and is compatible with most newer technologies, most newer processors and memory, and especially disk drives, then you'd probably want to use FreeDOS.
And I guess that would also have a niche in the embedded market.
Sure, yeah. Well, it definitely helps that it's open source, so you know the price is good. The price is right. So, yeah, absolutely. How about Dr. DOS? PC-DOS sounds really interesting, by the way. I would like to see your rig. You may convince me to finally delete mine and start over and install PC-DOS.
Well, I'm not going to delete mine at all. I'm going to use my handy-dandy SD to IDE adapter and just put it on a different SD card.
Oh, my goodness.
Which
I don't have one of those.
You will. I've got one sitting here waiting for you.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Yeah, I still run my DOS rig with good old hard drives with plates on them.
Ugh.
I like to hear the little clicky sound.
Ugh.
If I don't, it's a nostalgia thing for me. I need to hear it.
Yeah, I understand.
Cool. Well, tell us about Dr. DOS.
Okay, so did you look at it at all?
I looked at it briefly, but it was mostly a documentary about Gary Kleidahl. So
Kildall?
Kildall. Yes, sorry.
Oh, speaking of names, where was it? Remember when he mentioned Pat Vellani?
Yeah. Did I say his name right?
If you move the I in his name over 2 spaces, it's Pat Villain.
Ooh.
Coincidence? I think not.
I don't know. Dun dun dun.
So, sure. Digital Research DOS came from Digital Research, who was founded by Gary Kildall, who we have gushed at length about in previous episodes. So we won't do that.
Man crush.
Anyways, yes, man crush. So it was Digital Research's competitor to MS-DOS, since CP/M was no longer viable, and they chose version numbers to reflect features relative to MS-DOS. So we're going to start with with version 3. Just 3x. We're not going to go through the point releases. I'm just going to go through just the major releases and what they included. So version 3 came out in May 28th, 1988. It had a few extra command line tools, verbose error messages, and similar to what you were talking about with FreeDOS, it included a sophisticated command line history. So it would keep track of your commands. You could press up to look at previous commands, and that was quite handy. And
very neat.
Back then, you only saw that on more advanced Unix machines.
Well, that's great, and it's really handy. Mm-hmm.
It also had support for file and directory passwords built right into the kernel. So you could do, password locking, which is pretty cool. Version 5 started coming with...
Whoa. Where's version 4?
They skipped it. I forgot to write that down, but they skipped version 4 because they didn't want...
Did they pull a Microsoft? Did they do that? Instead of Windows 9, they went to Windows 10? Yeah, okay, I see.
Well, MS-DOS version 4 was a very buggy release, and they didn't want it to be associated with MS-DOS version 4.
Ah, okay, nice. I like that trick.
So they quite literally did pull a Microsoft, because Microsoft didn't pull a Microsoft when they should have, and so they pulled the Microsoft for them.
They were the original Microsoft.
So 5 came with
Gary Kildall at the helm.
So 5 came with quite a few more utilities. It included Vuemax, which was a GEM-based graphical file management shell. So GEM was Digital Research's graphical desktop environment. It had windows that you could manipulate, menus, a mouse, scroll bars that would resize to the contents of the window. It was pretty good looking, simple, but fairly advanced. You could change color schemes, and it's pretty nice to look at, and was pretty good for what compared to everything else at the time. It came with the Battery Max power management system, which detected idle behavior and switched processor power states accordingly. It came with bundled with some form of disk caching software. It had vastly improved memory management. So for the memory management, it had kernel instructors such as disk buffers, or starting that one over, kernel instructors such as disk buffers could be located in high memory areas, or HMA, to free the base 640K. Its EMS memory manager allowed the OS to load DOS drivers into upper memory blocks to free up even more memory. But freeing up all this memory came with an unexpected side effect. Some programs failed to run because they were expecting to be loaded into a higher area of the memory. So when they were put into that impossibly low first 64K segment, they just wouldn't run. So MemMax, one of its included utilities, got around this by pre-allocating a chunk of memory at the start of the memory map in order for programs to load above that barrier. So they did such a good job freeing up memory that they had to artificially consume it for programs to run.
I wonder if that negated the need for the freeing up so much memory.
It was an optional thing, so...
Mm-hmm.
So you could still get the benefit of it. Version 6, prior to version 6, Microsoft included features similar to Dr. DOS 6, and So Dr. DOS 6 was released in September 1991 to counter those. So Microsoft was catching up, had some nicer features, and so in DR-DOS version 6 they included Superstore on-the-fly disk compression, file deletion tracking and undelete functionality, multitasking. So one thing that the original DR-DOS was built upon was concurrent DOS, and concurrent DOS was had built-in multitasking. So that's what always set this DOS line apart, the ability to do some form of multitasking. So that got changed up a bit in DR-DOS version 6, and it included a task switcher called TaskMax, and it had its own. It also came with the industry standard task switching API to run multiple applications at the same time. But in old versions of DR-DOS, and I think concurrent DOS, correct me if I'm wrong, they had rudimentary preemptive multitasking via multitask virtual DOS machines. In DR-DOS version 6, they changed that behavior, and instead it would freeze applications in the background until they were brought into the foreground again. Now, TaskMax had its own command line full screen utility for switching programs back and forth for controlling the multitasking, but you can also have it be controlled from the task view gem-based GUI instead. And it had options where you could tell it to control it, and so you can use task view to control your multitasking. So there were some issues with Microsoft later on for Digital Research DOS. In December 1991, a pre-release version of Windows 3.1 was designed to return a non-fatal error message if it detected a non-Microsoft version of DOS. This check was known as the AARD code, which I believe its name stems back to the name of the developer that wrote that feature in quotes. But Windows 3.1 ran perfectly on DR-DOS with that check disabled. So the AARD check was present but disabled in the release version of Windows 3.1, but Digital Research still patched version 6 to circumvent the AARD check in Windows 3.1 beta, and that patch was available within 6 weeks of the release of Windows 3.1.
Didn't that allow... So didn't Microsoft create that in Windows 3.1 so that way you can only run MS-DOS on that on any system that had Windows 3.1? I think that's what it was. It was some kind of malicious code that they would that they had, some kind of malicious check actually that Windows 3.1 would have to check to see if you had MS-DOS installed. Yeah, devious dicks.
So after in July 1991, Novell bought Digital Research. So a lot happened after that. A ton happened after that, and we're not going to get into it now because it can be its own podcast episode. The main focus was just DR-DOS and its differences from MS-DOS. So I'll briefly go over the tiniest amount of what happened after the Novell acquisition. They were acquired July 1991. They released a very light resource. They released a very resource-light version of DR-DOS 6.0 called PalmDOS, aimed at the emerging Palm-Top-PDA market. In 1993, they renamed it to Novell-DOS, and Novell-DOS version 7 introduced even more advanced memory management and support for true preemptive multitasking of DOS applications. Then Novell later sold the product line to a company called Caldera on July 23rd, 1996.
Yeah, I would love to know more about this stuff. Definitely, I'd like to do another podcast on that. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it seems like it really could be.
Yeah, especially that Novell DOS 7 with the preemptive multitasking. Wow, that's almost unheard of in DOS.
Let's do it. Let's definitely do it.
Mm-hmm.
The meat of this discussion is in using it and in installing it and in seeing it. And the installation and use of Digital Research DOS is significantly different from MS-DOS or PC-DOS. They put a lot of thought into it. It is not I guess you could say it is not made to be entirely user-friendly. It's made to be configurable. It doesn't have the typical blue background. It's a black background digital research banner going across the top. And it lets you configure everything every step of the way. So just to go over some of the options, it allows you to select a balance of memory usage, whether you favor memory or functionality. It lets you change the path settings, so if you intend to install executables in another path later on, you don't have to do it after installation. You can do it right there in the installer and set up your own custom path. You can tell it where in memory to load system files. It lets you tweak disk caching settings. It gives you advanced EMM386 settings, lets you configure the buffers, and it even gives you the ability to customize your prompt to however you want it. So it
what version was this?
This was 5.0
tried out
I tested in the screenshots. Version 6 was very similar. Just had even more options. It was just made to be configurable and tweakable, but it was still very easy. I mean, you could just go, okay, enter, take all the defaults, and it would still work. So I played with Vumax, the gem-based GUI. It was nice. It was pretty. It looked good. I especially liked the pixelated bitmapped fonts that I used for folders. All in all, I was really impressed with Digital Research DOS. I was impressed with Vumax. I was impressed with the Task Manager. I wasn't able to get the Task Manager to really run that well. I was doing it wrong, but I did get it to switch between two programs, the text editor and Vumax itself. PC-DOS, FreeDOS, and Digital Research DOS are all definitely worth a look if you're a DOS enthusiast and you haven't played with them. I think my favorite, however, is Digital Research DOS because, I mean, Gary Kildall. Come on.
Kildall. Clydall.
And because of how configurable Digital Research DOS is, and I'd be curious to see if I can game on Digital Research DOS and what challenges I have using it.
Yeah, I'm also curious about that actually, especially on the memory utilization, since they seem to be very good at managing memory, even more so than the other DOS operating systems. I would love to know if you were to run. I mean, I assume that there's options for EMS and non-EMS and things like that. I don't know, but that would be neat to see if I would love that. Never mind. I don't even know where I was going with this, Chris.
All right. Yep. I don't know either. I didn't use it that much. I mean, we did all of our testing in NVMs like a couple of animals. Shame on us, but
shame. Yeah. No, I hear you, and I definitely would like to try out DRDOS.
I do believe that's all I have. Do you have any further thoughts?
I'd like to play around with some other versions of DOS, but I know that one of our podcasts coming up deals with Unix and different versions of Unix during that time. So I think I'm going to focus on that for a little while, and then I'm going to circle back to this. I'm really curious also about the later versions of DRDOS anyway. So if we could, if we just had an episode on probably some history and some checking out of DRDOS, yeah, that would be great. I'm going to put that down on our things to do, things to talk about list. So that sounds fun. That
would be fun. And I think I'm going to dive more into FreeDOS and play with some more of those programs that are available for it. I noticed another graphical desktop in that list that I want to try.
Oh yeah, and I'd like to check out Aura.
Okay, should I tell our fine audience how they can get in contact with us?
Yes, please, sir. Go ahead.
So if anyone would like to send us feedback on this episode or corrections or words of praise, we especially love those. So we can be contacted on our Facebook page at Fork Bomb Podcast on Facebook. Just do a search for Fork Bomb Podcast. You'll find us there. But it's www.facebook.com/Fork Bomb Podcast. We can be found on Twitter at Fork Bomb Podcast, and we can be emailed at forkbombpodcast@gmail.com. We actually do have a website that we've had this entire time, forkbomb.podbean.com. So,
yep, that's our good old home.
Yep, but no need to really go there. You'll get us on the podcatchers. So, do talk to us.
Yep.
We would love to talk to you, and thank you, as always, for listening.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Euro.
Thanks, Chris, and good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you. It's been too long.
Good night. Check out how I'm holding this.
Nice. Like
Mystical
an orb.
Like one of those metal gods.
Good shit.
Oh, man.